Welcome back. In the previous step, we had coded the response for the exchange value. But ideally, this response should come from a database, or it can be an external MQ service that we would be talking to. What we'll do here is to set up a simple JPA connection to a in-memory database. To be able to connect to the in-memory database, we would need to be able to add in a couple of dependencies in. I'll go to the pom.xml of the currency exchange service. Be very careful. So we are going to the pom.xml of currency exchange service, and we are going to add in a starter for data JPA. So Spring Boot starter data JPA, and the next thing I would want to add in is a dependency on the H2 database. I would want H2 as the in-memory database. So the group ID and artifact ID. The group ID is com.h2 database and the artifact ID is h2. Once you save the pom.xml out, the workspace would be built, those two dependencies would be imported in, and our project would be able to make use of JPA to connect to the in-memory database H2. If you're new to JPA, I would recommend you to look at the appendix to the section Introduction to JPA. It would be very useful to get a quick introduction to JPA before you come and use this JPA in here. What I'll do now is actually this group ID should be small ID. So I'll fix that. Artifact ID also uses small d. So group ID, artifact ID, we want to use com.h2 database h2. So we are adding dependencies for two things. One is Spring Boot started data JPA and the other one is h2. Once we added the dependencies in, now we can define our entities. The entity I want to define is the exchange value entity. What I'll do here is at entity, I'll import javax.persistence.entity, and over here we would add in at ID, javax persistence ID. The rest of the stuff I can leave as it is. So now we have defined an entity and we have defined an ID field for that entity. One of the things which we can do is initialize some data into the database. How do we do that? It would be done through something called data.sql. So I'll say control and new SQL file, and I can call this data.sql, and I can insert values into the table. So insert into, this is exchange underscore value. So this would be exchange underscore value, and I will specify the columns where I would want to insert the data for. So ID, comma, from, comma, to, comma, conversion multiple. I don't want to specify the value for the port. Port we would want to determine based on where the application is running. So conversion underscore multiple. So in the table, all your camel case things, exchange value would be exchange underscore value, conversion multiple would be conversion underscore multiple. And I would want to insert a few dummy values in. So I'll say ID is 10,001, from is, let's say, USD, to is INR. The conversion multiple I would say is 65 and semicolon. Now I can do the same thing. Let's add a few more conversion values. EUR, I would want to actually say EUR to INR is around 75, and let's select another currency. Let's say Australian dollar. I don't even know if I got the symbol right. So Australian dollar to INR, let's say it's around 25. I have no idea what the exchange rate for Australian dollar is. I'm just adding some dummy values. What we have here is a few dummy rows inserted into the table. One of the things I would want to be able to do is see the table and the data which is present. So I would want to enable something called H2 console, as well as I would want to see the queries which are being generated. The way we can do that is by using spring.jpa.showSQL is equal to true. The other thing I would also want to be able to do is to enable the H2 console. You can say spring.h2console.enabled is equal to true. Let's now start the application on port 8000. When you start the application up, you would see an error. It says table exchange value not found. It's because the creation of the table has failed. Why has the creation of the table failed? If you go further up in the log, you would see the create table has failed. It says expected identifier. Actually, the reason is because we used one of the column names as from. If you look at the exchange value table, here we have one of the columns as from. And in SQL, from is a keyword. From is typically used in situations like select star from table or select star from a set of tables. So in that sense, you cannot have a column name with the name as from. So how do we avoid that? What we'll do is the column name, we will change it to a different thing. So we'll still refer to it as from in our Java code. However, the column name for that, let's assign a different name. I can do that in JPA by saying column name is equal to currency from. One of the things is I would want to be consistent, so I'll say even for the two, currency to. So we'll have columns currency from and currency to. And you can organize the inputs. The thing is, we are using the column names in the data.sql, so let's fix that as well. So this should be currency from and this is currency to. So let's fix all the three rows that we tried to insert earlier: currency from, currency to, currency from, currency to. We'll also assign a default value for the port. So comma port, comma 0, comma port, comma 0, comma 0, comma port. Very simple. We inserted three values into exchange value, and we would want to be able to retrieve them using a repository, which we'll be doing a little later. For now, we would want to make sure that this data is being inserted into the database properly. Let's start the application again. You can see that the table is created properly now, and I hope the data is also properly inserted. Yep, it's being inserted properly, and you can see that the server is up and running on port 8000. If you look at this line, it says executing SQL script from data.sql. So this data.sql is executed fine. We can run the service on localhost 80,000. It runs fine. We have not really made any changes to the service yet. And if I go to localhost 80,000 and h2 console and say connect with the default values, you'll be able to see the exchange value table. So the entire exchange value table is created, and you can do a run select star from exchange values to see all the values which are present in the table. In this quick step, we set up a simple in-memory database and we inserted a few values into this table. If you're new to JPA or in-memory database, I would really recommend you to spend some time with the appendix section on Introduction to JPA. It will introduce you to JPA, it will introduce you to in-memory database, it will introduce you to data.sql in much more detail than we are doing in here. Until the next step, bye-bye.